Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for sharing a little bit about why you're here. So my name is Kelly McHugh, and I am now the head collections manager at NMAI. I was an objects conservator at NMAI for about 21 years, and I just switched over to collections management, which is really exciting. I've only been in that job for about 4 months. And I appreciate the broad breadth of taking care of a collection in that way. I had been really focused in the care of the collection at NMAI, so this is an exciting evolution for me. I have a lot of respect for collections managers now, more than I think I ever knew before. And then this is my co-presenter.
I'm Leah Bright, and I am supremely lucky to have a 2-year postgraduate fellowship in objects conservation at NMAI, where I'm lucky to work with Kelly.
So Leah and I both, you all can imagine the collection at NMAI, there's over 800,000 items in the collection. A lot of those are made from hide, a lot of those are beaded hide. And there are, as we can see, just even from going around the room, how many different issues there are related to hide. Right now, I'm going to dash your expectations about this workshop because we only have an hour together, okay? So we're probably not going to address every concern, but we're happy to stay afterwards and talk specifically about whatever case you might have. Painted hides, we're not going to get to so much, but they are kind of their own, category in a way, but we can touch on some of that. So the way we are going to structure it, and if we were at the museum, we would have amazing belongings out. We could really get into it and look closely. In lieu of that, we're gonna have to show some of a PowerPoint because I think it's important to get some points across so that you all leave with something if we actually show you some illustrations of things. And then our hope is that we'll be able to go through some hands-on activities here, which there's a lot of us in the room, so we'll hopefully be able to actually get to some of that, and we'll be focusing on kind of superficial cleaning of hides and some tear repair. One method of tear repair, I should say. So Leah and I this is very casual. We're gonna kind of, to make it dynamic, we're gonna team it. Yeah, we're gonna dance now, we're gonna team it. So now you know who we are. So like I said, these are the main topics that we want to touch on today. So we're going to talk about hide structure and manufacture very briefly, but important to understand what are you dealing with, kind of even at the micro level. What are some of the common condition issues? I think even hearing you all shared some of the common condition issues that you're experiencing. Preventive conservation, how can we kind of in a holistic way prevent some of these issues from happening so that we don't have to deal with them in the first place? And then conservation treatment basics, just things that we can do in a very kind of basic level that will kind of assist or aid our hide or skin belongings. So just to start, you all probably know this, and I know many of you probably even process hides, and I encourage anyone to chime in during this with your knowledge and expertise, because while I have tanned a hide, I am not a professional hide tanner. So I can appreciate how much work it is, but I haven't done it extensively myself. But we know that hides are really comprised of layers of proteinaceous collagen, and you can kind of see the structure here. The side that has the hair follicle, we refer to as the grain side. The hair follicles and the glands are usually removed during processing. The side that's attached to the muscle is the flesh side. And so when you look at a hide, you kind of can identify what side is the flesh side and what side is the grain side. The flesh side will typically be more fibrous in nature. When removing a skin from an animal, typically there's a cut down the underbelly, and then taken off in one piece. And that's important kind of in our considerations of condition issues because the sides are often thinner and the thickest part of the hide is kind of along the back. So if you're gonna have tears in your hide or issues with stiffness, it usually occurs at the parts where you have less material. So that's often at the edges.
And how hides are manufactured in different ways can affect their condition issues, and they might be more vulnerable to other kinds of damage than others. Rawhide and parchment are like it sounds, raw hide that's usually stretched over a frame and dried. Semi-tan hides are generally considered like brain tanning or smoke tanning, that can also be pretty vulnerable to water and aren't considered fully tanned leathers. Vegetable tanning uses tannins from bark, twigs, and leaves and things like that, since tannins are very acidic, they have their own sets of condition issues. I don't know if you guys have probably heard of red rot. That's something that affects only vegetable tanned leathers, that usually exhibits as really crumbly leather, and leather that just starts to fall apart. Other tanning agents, things that are used commonly today for industrial uses, are metallic elements like chrome, salts, and it's really important to consider other elements on your hides. Like everyone has said, there's lots of paint and beads. Metals can contribute to the condition of a hide.
So I think it's important, why are our hides even processed in the first place? And that is, for longevity, right? To render them flexible, to render them waterproof, to render them useful. And I think, one thing that's really kind of amazing about items made out of hide or skin is that kind of connectivity that we have even to our own skin. The objects made out of hide and skin are very personal. They're often garments or containers, and so really important for people in their day-to-day life and the usage of those. And so there's a very intimate interaction between people and items made out of hide, I would say. And so this processing is in order to, extend that usefulness and that kind of longevity, I guess you could say. So I'm a particular fan of the inner skins, and my family thinks that that's a little strange. I'm not going to lie. But I actually find the usage of inner organs, and unfortunately, we're not going to get a chance to talk too much about inner organs today, which makes me sad because intestines and stomachs and bladders, the heart sac, all of these have a particular purpose and usage, amongst indigenous people, and just a very material engineering genius way of utilizing the properties of each of these organs. But just to know that these will be in collections. Obviously, it's important to be able to identify an inner skin versus an outer skin. And just a really quick tip someone gave me, actually, Alaska Native person, was like, the inner skins don't have hair follicles. So there are times when you're like looking for things and you're like, is that an outer skin? There's pieces of esophagus used on things, and those will not exhibit evidence of hair follicles. So that's one way to identify if something is an inner skin.
And this is again to underscore that the use and wear of a piece can obviously affect its condition, but also how it was manufactured has an impact on its condition issues. On the left side is a piece of vegetable tan leather that is starting to get crumbly, and it has that deep, rich color. And underneath is a piece of brain tanned hide that is really soft and supple, and they kind of are fluffy, which are really great properties, but can attract a lot of dust and dirt and really hold on to that. So you can kind of see that in this photo.
And why it's kind of important to be able to identify deterioration or what kind of tanning you have is because you can anticipate certain types of deterioration associated with those different tanning techniques. So as Leah was saying, vegetable tanned leather is often, suffers from red rot, is crumbly, powdery. You see it on saddles, you see it on book covers, you see it kind of extensively. And it is challenging to treat, to be honest. And so, but it's good to know kind of what the processing was in order to understand what it is that you're really dealing with. So we're just going to kind of go through really quickly some of the common condition issues that you find when dealing with hide, and I'm sure you all have experienced this, but you'll see stiff or brittle hides that just, if you feel like you move them, you're afraid they're going to tear or crack. Misshapen hides, you can see that on this pipe bag actually up at the top. When hide gets in a certain position and stays in that position for a long time, it has a lot of memory and doesn't want to leave that position very easily. So you see a lot of misshapen hides. And
often because of misshapen elements that can lead to tearing, One of my professors used to always say that a fold becomes, a crease becomes a tear. So I always repeat that to myself. And similarly, like you can see in this bag, there's a crease and a fold and also some holes. And around those creases and holes, the hide has started to delaminate and crack and split.
Our favorite, fatty acid spew. I mean, who doesn't, you know? So that often comes from like oiliness, either from applied oils to the hide, and we'll see an example of that a little bit later. Hides that are salty, salts migrate out to the surface, hides that might have been used, you know, worn. Obviously dirty hides.
Yeah, dirt from use in the past and also from their time in the museum, dust can accumulate. And it's important to us to consider if we want to remove that dirt and dust and what is important to leave behind. And pest damage is pretty self-explanatory. Lots of bugs like to eat proteins and will absolutely eat hide.
And so the way in conservation we kind of separate things out are like, what are structural issues, structural condition issues? So that would be like tearing or cracking or splitting. And what are surface issues? And those would be like dirt and, you know, the oil, fatty spews, things that are affecting the top surface of the hide.
And these are just some detailed images of the bag on the previous slide that was just getting prepped for exhibition in the last couple weeks. Unfortunately, not much is known about its history, but it seems like it was likely nailed to a wall from that top section, and that has caused a lot of weight on that one top area, and it creased, and the hide is in really, really delicate shape. The sides are really creased, which has caused other perpendicular tears, which has in some areas caused the beadwork to also become unstable.
So that's the frustrating thing about beaded hides, is that sometimes the hide cannot support the weight of the beads, and so there always is this interaction or relationship between the materials that you have. So moving on to kind of what do we do about this? Well, you know, preventive conservation is really your first line of defense, and there's a lot of damage that can be mitigated from employing good preventive conservation techniques. And you all are I'm certain, familiar with all of these, so these aren't going to be necessarily new things. But the environment is really critical, maintaining kind of standard or stable temperature, humidity, and light. Each of those have different effects on hide. So with the environment, if the temperature is too high, you can have a breakdown in your collagen. The RH, those fluctuations, the swelling and shrinking, that mechanical action also can have an effect. And light can actually discolor hide over time and also can cause a breakdown in the collagen fibers themselves. Integrated pest management, sure. I mean, this is a practice that's been put into place. I think, again, most people are very familiar with it. Handling, obviously, is one of the most critical parts of dealing with hide, and kind of safe transport from one place to another. How you actually handle something can really, especially when you have a weakened hide and we're worried about tearing, just safe handling measures can do a lot to prevent damage. And then storage and display mounts as well, kind of for that same reason.
Yeah, and like Kelly mentioned, the environment is important to help keep all of your collections safe and sound. Hides are moderately susceptible to damage from light exposure, and heat can definitely start to break down those collagen fibers. Like Helen mentioned, the stability in relative humidity is really important, because with all of those fluctuations, if you have a lot of fluctuations in humidity, and the hides like to contract and then expand again, that can actually cause them to not be able to retain moisture as much anymore. So it'll cause them to be more brittle and more likely to be creased and tear.
So here is just a good resource for the integrated pest management. This is a great website. It's very helpful in kind of establishing an integrated pest management program. It's a great resource, and we utilize it all the time, actually, at NMAI. For identifying what you're finding. Pesticides were commonly used in museums in the past. Obviously museums have moved away from doing that because of the potential interaction between people and their belongings, and also they weren't necessarily proven to be super effective over time. So now a more holistic approach, so kind of keeping food away, that's a huge challenge for us at the museum. People always want to eat at their desk, The head of security, I had to go shake him down the other day because he just loves to eat his lunch in his desk, So really trying to keep, a clean space, keep your spaces vacuumed, keep them clean. We have sticky traps set out. We just do a monitoring program, and we use freezing, low temperature mitigation for our prevention. And then handling, like we said, this is actually what the collection storage looks like at NMAI, and it's 12 feet high compactorized storage units, which are not ideal because we have to use these waves, these kind of like things you see used in warehouse to lift people up in order to access objects that are higher up. And there's risks associated with that, but one thing that has been greatly designed in this is like we have these textile screens and you can see the garments from below. And what's really nice about that is the way it was conceived of is that you would have your garments on the textile screen, and instead of having to lift up the garment, you could actually lift up the coroplast piece. Now, in theory, that worked great. In practice, we actually don't really use that because the screens are just too big. And so we do have to move them individually. And when we do that, we always put some kind of support underneath. So, a piece of blue board, a piece of coroplast, just some, sheet that's big enough to support the entire size of whatever it is that you're moving, and then we pick the garment up or whatever it is that we're moving on that backing board. And so we'll have all different sizes of backing boards just readily available in the collection.
And storage and display mounts are integral to prolonging the life of a garment. As you can see in the photo, both of these garments are on hangers, but they've been padded out quite a bit with likely a batting, like quilting batting, covered with cotton stockinette. And that helps to make sure there aren't any creases and folds. Something similar could also be done if you have something lying flat. If it has sleeves, you could use some acid-free tissue or something like that to pad out to make sure that there aren't any hard folds or creases. Something like a wire hanger could be pretty bad for an object, as it would cause a lot of the weight just to be on one small place and it could cause a really sharp crease, and also could corrode, which would also stain and start to deteriorate the hide.
And I think it's look, as we all get older, we all need a little support, and that's just the way that I look at it. And so, these pieces need support too. And so, like, whenever I approach an object, I kind of think about that, like, what are its needs? Like, where does it need to be kind of supported, maybe with a pillow or an insert, or how can I, prevent any like sharp creases or sharp folds from occurring? And so, just kind of looking at it like that. So when we were talking about fatty spew, this is a really good example, and the conservator at the Alaska State Museum, Ellen Carlee, wrote a great article about and she has a great blog, and we should totally pitch that blog. So she just really puts up effective and really practical and really useful information on her blog. So she's been amazing about contributing kind of information to the greater good. And so I think because she kept coming across this in the museum collection, she finally was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna write about this, because it is our temptation, right? Look, we do it with our own skin. I brought my skin cream here because, your skin gets a little dry, it's feeling, you wanna put something on it. We put stuff on our shoes. If you ride horses, you put, oils and things on your tack. And that's, that's not a bad thing because those things are active, those things are in use. And so, those are worn off and that can contribute. But when you are dealing with an item that may not be so active anymore, that is pretty much, resting comfortably a lot of the time. Those oils and those fats interact and over time age, and you get this this fatty, oily spew that develops over the surface, and actually can be damaging to the hide over time. And that damage is actually irreversible damage. And so while it may be all of our impulse to do that because you want to restore suppleness, you want to restore flexibility, resist that impulse because it doesn't have great lasting effects. The other temptation may be to use some tape. No, I'm kidding. But we actually see this pretty extensively in the collection. And this was a large buffalo hide, a crow hide, that is now in the Infinity of Nations exhibition and was selected as one being really important to have. Its condition was really fair. And I would say, the hide obviously had suffered extensive tears, and you saw them mostly on the outsides of the hide where the skin was thinner. And it had been repaired with tape, and it was a linen tape applied with hide glue. And so the conservator, Ann Kingery, literally spent 2 years working on this piece, trying to safely remove these pieces of tape and then putting on new repairs, which you see here, which are basically Japanese tissue paper and an adhesive to structurally support the hide again by repairing these tears. And so, but you can see that despite her efforts, just getting the tape off was really risky because it itself was damaging the hide. So she was kind of in this really difficult place of, in her best efforts to conserve the hide, she was causing some damage. It's just because the nature of that repair was so tenacious that it was impossible not to have an effect. And so it still has its remnants. You can see the evidence of the tape here even after conservation treatment. So, you will, not that you all will do this, but you could encounter hide pieces that tape has been used. And that's a very complex kind of situation, I will just say.
And while we try to avoid tape, we do quite a bit of vacuuming. Dust can be hygroscopic, meaning it attracts moisture, and sometimes it might have particles that bugs might like to eat. But like I said, it's important to consider what kind of soiling you want to remove, because everything we like to do is as reversible as possible, and cleaning is actually pretty irreversible. So it's important. It seems like a really simple thing, but we still take it pretty seriously.
Yeah, and I think we're not getting heavily into documentation, but this is a very important point, is that before you do anything, you're doing an examination of what it is that you're working on. You assess its condition, you assess its needs, and then you create a plan of action. And so in that plan of action, you're also kind of either working with a community member, your curator, to understand, why is this damage here in the first place? Was this from use? Was this, what are these residues? What is this dirt from? And so then the decision-making process comes in, like, should this be removed at all? And so we're not getting so into that in this, but this is like a very critical component of the process. So vacuuming, we're not going to, we don't have to dissect the vacuum. We'll try to actually fire up the Nilfisk, and everybody can maybe have a go at doing a little bit of cleaning. The HEPA filter vacuum with a rheostat, so you can adjust the suction, is a great tool to have, and I'm sure you all have heard that, but that is actually what we use to do the surface cleaning. Also use cosmetic sponges and soot sponges to try to remove more tenacious dirt. Again, this is if you have a really fragile hide that's really thin and extensively torn, this is not something that you would do because the hide just can't take it. But it's a great method for removing more kind of tenacious surface dirt. You can employ brushes, different tools in order to accomplish that. And importantly, if something has been infested, it's really good to remove that infestation so that you can do some accurate monitoring of the piece going forward. Because if you don't know what's old or new, it's going to be kind of confusing. So really, these are just kind of, warnings or suggestions before you kind of, while you're endeavoring to kind of care for or treat your items made out of hide. These are just some kind of tips. And I think the only do what you feel comfortable doing is really important, because instinctively we know when we've kind of gotten to a point where we're not really sure we can handle something, and that happens to me oftentimes with sewing, because I'm an objects conservator, I'm not a textile conservator, and luckily I work in a big enough lab where if there's something that I need to do that's a repair using sewing that I know I don't have the skills for, I will just call out to the textile conservators or to someone who has greater skill than I do to implement those treatments. So there's a lot you can do, and passive interventions, so supporting objects made out of hide is something that is a really effective way to prevent damage. And again, we're talking about preventing creasing and tearing.
Yep, and this is just another example of that where, there we go. The conservator used just some magnets and a couple pieces of board to help soften the creases there on the top part of the moccasin.
And then this is a girl's dress that was just actually treated for a loan that went to the Epcot Center. And you can see this is actually water damage on the side of the dress. And it's really stiff. The hide, when exposed to water, becomes really stiff and brittle. And you can actually employ a nice massage technique in order to reduce that stiffness. When collagen fibers are linked, if you can apply a little pressure, and it literally is like, we all like a nice massage, right? Well, so do the skins. And so you can apply like a little pressure between your fingers, and you can actually work out some of that stiffness, which actually, let's see. Well, this is just showing the extent of the documentation of this particular dress and all of the bead. There were bead loss issues, there were tears, and there was this issue of water staining and stiffness. But this is just a before and after, and it's subtle, but I think what's really great about this technique is that it's very easy to employ, it's very effective, and it actually can make both a structural and visual difference in your hide. And that's maybe a better before and after. The conservator working on this, Beth Knight, also used, she used a little porcupine quill, which we have actually on the table, or you can even use a stiff brush. So sometimes your fingers aren't enough, and you can just go in really carefully and kind of like apply a little bit of pressure with a more kind of focused implement, and you end up with really great results. So that's before and after treatment. And so that's the PowerPoint part of the session. What we'd really like to do, though, is try to get you guys doing some hands-on, and there's a lot of people in here, so this is going to be a little tricky. But what we did is I actually dirtied up a hide, and what we can do is maybe practice doing some surface cleaning and some sew repairs using hair silk and a needle. So I think I can see I put this in the mulch outside, so this is probably not replicating the kind of dirt you'll find on your okay. Caribou hair is hollow hair, which actually will release and fall out. There's, again, I think in that instance, there's no way to kind of keep it on there unless if there's insects. Freezing would be the way to mitigate that. If you can't do that, I would say that really reducing the amount of handling and reducing the amount of hair loss is really, I think, sometimes all you can do, unfortunately. If anybody else has any ideas on that, though, but we, there's this term, it's like inherent vice. Like at times there's things that are not necessarily totally preventable or fixable. Okay, so you guys, we'll pass out. You have, if you're sitting at the table, some things in your kits, which are like cosmetic sponges. I'm gonna pass out some, these are some soot sponges, which are a different type of, here you go. This is a vulcanized rubber. So really these different sponges, the difference is in like the cell structure. Okay. And so they kind of pick up surface dirt in different ways, and if you all want to experiment with doing that, oops, you can. And unfortunately, we only have one vacuum, but what I would say is if you take your dirty hide, and the way this process would go is you would want to start with vacuuming. So actually, Leah, maybe you can. So we only have one vacuum, so if you wanted to, people can come up and try to use this, but what we also use in terms of surface cleaning, which is something that's come into the conservation world fairly recently, I would say, is actually, you know, those old cheap hotel blankets that you get? They are great for removing surface dirt on objects. And so these are like a polyurethane core with like a nylon looping, so they grab dirt really well. So the way that we use this is we literally buy a big blanket from wherever, Amazon. It costs about $30 for like a king size blanket. We cut up the pieces, and then we typically attach it to the tip of the vacuum, the micro attachment of the vacuum. And you can use different attachments, but Leah can even demonstrate actually maybe with this, because what's really nice about this is that it's a very gentle way to clean something, but it is really effective, and you can also see what it is you've done. Like you'll be able to tell when you.
But they can shed the little nylon fibers, so it's important to, it seems kind of counterintuitive, but to vacuum it again after you use the Velux to make sure you remove those fibers, because they shouldn't be there. They're not part of it.
I know. There we go. So the nice thing with the rheostat is you can adjust the level of suction, and that's really important. And if rheostats, you know, you can buy them actually. They can be really expensive when you buy them associated with the vacuum itself. If you know anyone who's handy electronically, you can buy a separate rheostat and attach it to a vacuum. That can work. I've also known people who have like poked holes in their vacuum hoses just to reduce the amount of suction. Whatever it takes, I think it's just that you don't want obviously too much suction, because that's going to be damaging itself. So really, you know, the fleshy side of the hide loves to grab dirt, and so there's not necessarily a directionality that's important with that. Again, it's careful looking at your piece, at your hide, and kind of going in whatever direction you feel is effective. So, did anything come off?
Nope.
No? Try this one.
Want to try?
So really the way it would go is you would vacuum the hide, you could use Velux, you could use a brush simply and a vacuum nozzle, and you could use a soft brush, and you could brush, you know, into the nozzle like that. After you vacuumed the hide, then would be the time you would try the cosmetic sponges or the soot sponge. And again, depending on the kind of dirt you have, a different sponge is going to be effective. So these are simple ways to remove surface dirt, and they're pretty effective actually. I would never recommend using water ever. No, exactly. That makes mud. Yes, exactly. And the hide does not love that. So, so really effective dry cleaning methods. You guys, that's another point I just want to share with you, because I've seen this over my career. They say that, you know, hides are not that light sensitive, but smoked tan hides are light sensitive. And I've seen significant fading with smoked tan hides. And so I don't think people in the museum profession give that enough attention. They think hides are really durable and you can put them on exhibit and they're not light sensitive. But smoked tan hides are extremely light sensitive. And I actually worked on a pair of moccasins where they were separated. One was put on display for probably 30 years under fluorescent lights, and the other moccasin stayed in collections storage. they literally look like two different shoes. I was so stunned by the amount of fading that had occurred with the piece on exhibit. So it went from that nice kind of orange smoky color to literally like almost like a whitish gray color, which would have been, and it was moose hide. And I will say, like, a lot of times moose hide is frequently smoked for waterproofness, but also for appearance. I've worked with some folks who are Athabascan who say that we don't love the color of the hide, moose hide, so smoking it makes it more beautiful, and it makes it water repellent. But especially freshly smoked hides. So I throw that out there because I don't know if that's commonly known. People think of hides as being kind of robust, and they are, but there are some issues. So in order to save space, hides are often really big, and so you may want to, the temptation would be to fold them in order to save space in collections, but really that can be damaging. Like we've said, it causes creases, and then these result in tears. And so at NMAI, we do a lot of rolling of the hides. Now, and Linda just brought that up, and that's actually a great way to care for them because, as she said, you can also get discoloration around where the crease is. And so rolling is a great way to save space and to like carefully kind of store and effectively store your hides. Now, painted hides, they have their own set of issues, you know. We recently did a big textile rehousing project where there were some painted hides that I felt the paint just couldn't take the rolling. Okay. You know what I mean? And so that's where you have to use your judgment in terms of how well bound are the paints to the hide itself. And if you feel like there's a risk, then I would recommend just not rolling those. And that can be sometimes a tricky judgment call. But we just use these archival textile tubes and muslin, and you have the muslin rolled with a leader. You place your hide on, and then you start to carefully roll it. And then you can put an outer piece of muslin over it, and then you can use twill tape to just tie that. And so it's a nice protective way to kind of care for the hides, and you're not encouraging or dealing with any kind of folding or creasing. So over the long term, that's a really effective way to store hides. Now, this is like a flat, thin hide, and so that looks really easy. We all know that, hides have a mind of their own, and so they're going to be undulating, and they're going to be, so that can cause some trickiness. You can kind of stuff out with tissue areas where you have voids to make, again, the most kind of cohesive, well, I don't know what the best way to say this. Like, you're filling in the gaps so that when you're rolling, it's even, so you're not getting everything. Because when you have unevenness, that can also be damaging. So, yeah.
And then do you suspend these, or do they?
We do suspend them, and that would be ideal, I think, if you have a way to put it on some kind of rod or racking system. That is definitely ideal. Yeah.
Would you roll a dress or a beaded shirt?
I would not do that. That's an excellent question, actually. I think because of the fragility, you know how beads, any pressure on them can cause the threads, even if it's sinew, to break. I wouldn't roll a beaded or quilled piece. Yeah.
So you would store flat?
I would store flat. Yep, definitely.
In a box or a drawer, depending on what you read?
Yeah, so that is dependent on the situation you have in your, we typically will store, say like war shirts, for example, flat on a screen. If you don't have a configuration like that, and if you want to put it, I would just say you could even put it on a flat kind of archival piece of blue board or coroplast, something is heavy enough. If you're going to be moving things around, I mean, that's the other thing to consider, like how much access does your collection have? Because if people are taking things in and out, you may want to have some kind of tray, we have rolled things that are embroidered. And again, it's assessing whether the strength and condition of those threads. Yeah. So Leah she just did some vacuuming, and just to show you all, this is what, I know, this is really satisfying. So if anyone wants to come and use the Nilfisk and see how the Velux works with it, what we love about it is that, this can be painstaking work, right? You're sitting here for hours. This is effective, but the beautiful thing about that is that you can see you've actually done something, Because sometimes when you're working on these types of belongings, you don't want a huge visual difference a lot of times, right? That means you've kind of maybe gone too far. So we might work for hours and hours on something, and someone will come up, a curator will come in, and Emil Horses always says, what are you doing? What have you done? And I'm like, I've been here for 3 hours. Doesn't it look better, And then another conservator will come in and say, oh my gosh, that hide looks so much better. It's so much brighter. And I'm like, oh, thank you, So, the differences are subtle. The other technique that we can show you guys quickly in terms of repair of hides, there's different ways, and again, this is something where you can work with a conservator if you're not able to work with a conservator, or you have really talented people in your community or at your cultural center. There's different ways to repair tears in hides, and that can get very complex. And you saw, Ann Kingery with her Japanese tissue-backed repair of that buffalo robe were super complicated. As you all know, hides a lot of times traditionally the repairs were done by sewing. I would say that we employ a method of sewing tears and using adhesive, and that depends on the kind of tear it is and the nature of the object itself. But we just kind of wanted to show you in terms of the tear repair using sewing. We work with hair silk, which is silk, and this is a braid of it. What's really great about this is that silk is very fine, but it's very strong, and so you can kind of have little but effective impact, I think. And so we use hair silk and a very fine needle in order to do the sewn repairs. And so Leah has started.
And what size is that needle? How do you know?
That's an excellent question.
The really fine ones were like a 15 and a 13. But these other ones,
These other ones actually are probably too big, to be honest with you. But because you're trying to minimize the holes. Right, exactly. So that's really, I think that's the important consideration. And so, yeah, go ahead, Leah, do you want to? Again, this is hard to do because it's hard to show you all. It's kind of a big space. And
it might be easier if I pass around. I did a little bit earlier.
yeah, so we don't poke the hole all the way through. So this is a very thin hide, but typically you will have some depth, some fleshiness to your brain tan hide, and so it would be just going through, the surface of that enough so that you're not tearing. You have to go deep enough so that you have something to sew into, and then moving across the tear, and then back and forth, and again, like this, then you create, structural stability by closing the tear. Visually, you can't really see it. The thickness of the hair silk and the thinness of the needle really are not putting huge holes in the hide. You're not, having a huge kind of destructive impact in doing that. And so again, like in my time in conservation, I was trained as an object conservator, and in object conservation, we would typically use adhesive, or a lot of times adhesive with backing materials to repair tears, almost like a Band-Aid, is the way I kind of think about it. Working closely with the textile conservators at NMAI who sew tears in fabric, they really look at the hide almost like as a fabric, right? And so I kind of started to share more. We kind of shared our skills, and I appreciated the sewn tear repair in certain circumstances. There have been objects where we've employed both sets of things, where the hide could not take sewing because it just did not have enough structural integrity. So that pipe bag that Leah showed that had the small tears, that pipe bag was very thin and very weak. Like it could not have withstood a sewn repair in an effective way. So she did use adhesive. We're not going to go into the whole adhesive repair. This would be like a 3-day workshop if we did that, but there's different methods and different adhesives that you can use. The most important thing, to keep in mind is that we're always using materials that are reversible, that have good aging properties to do those adhesive repairs. And so there's different adhesives that kind of are called out. I learned a technique when I was at Arizona with Nancy Odegaard of using Jade 403, which is an emulsion, a PVA emulsion, to repair tears. And if we had time, I would show you all that, but I don't think we're going to have enough time. But I think in terms of doing repairs, that is something that is really, does requires knowledge, skill, and it requires, and that's not to say who has that knowledge and skill, people who are really familiar with working with hide, who make hides, who work with hide, make regalia, people who have those skills are totally capable of doing that. The important thing is, using your judgment and using the right materials in order to do those. So, again, like we've been in the situation at NMAI where we've been asked to do some serious repair on beadwork, and we just don't possess those same level of skills as beaders. And so, working in partnership with, bead workers and things like that, I think that's a really important resource that you all have actually in your communities, is this knowledge and these skills exist. So, well, you guys, if anybody wants to try, again, like Leah's coming around and kind of showing the sewing, that may be something to try. You all could come up and just try the vacuum with the Velux. The other thing is there's some stiff hides here. Again, this kind of, I know it sounds ridiculous, this massaging technique, but it is really effective. It is really, really effective. And it just, patience and kind of sticking with an area for a period of time, you can even, this can go around and you can even see the effects of that. So what can happen with the interaction between metal and hide is the fats from the hide can actually corrode the metal, and you can get this like verdigris corrosion actually, which looks like a bright green kind of waxy corrosion product on the metal. In that case, you could put an isolating layer between the metal and the hide if you see that happening. If you don't, it's fine. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. You don't have to do that. This is a soot sponge. Yes, you can take it and you can rub it. Okay. Kind of like this. And you start to see the dirt coming off. So not too harsh, right? That's exactly right. So you're using your judgment in terms of pressure, and and it's like you can always go over something again, right? So like you're looking, and then you're kind of constantly checking. So we're getting a little bit off each time.
Towels or water?
No. Okay. I would not at all. No. And then these are cosmetic sponges, and we gave you guys a materials list. These are also really effective. You do have to vacuum after using these because they'll leave little crumbly bits. You guys are welcome to please take any of these. But you can see, so here the pieces of the hide are coming off in the way I'm doing it. So I would not continue with the amount of pressure I'm using, obviously,
what are you trying to do there? Just get some of the dirt off?
Yeah, exactly. So really the way I would do this is I would vacuum it, I would take it over, I would use Velux. We can even go through this, you guys, if you want to. Follow the direction of the fibers in the I would then start to go through and see what I could remove using this. Now this is, which is I would not want to do, right? So this is too sticky, right? So I would stop with this.
I wouldn't even rub with the vacuum. I just
Lot.
Yeah.
So you can actually do, and it is effective to just do that. And so you're just using pressure. So again, your object's going to tell you, is going to dictate what it is that you're doing. But after I did this, because these do leave pieces of residue, I would then go back over and I would vacuum with just either the brush or with a soft brush, a fan brush, any kind of brush, and I would brush it into the vacuum nozzle if you didn't have this. So that actually, like a really good surface cleaning can be really effective in terms of improving the appearance of the hide.
Nice.